Hello, fellow human. Welcome to day 10 of my 30-day talk to camera challenge. Today, I'm supposed to discuss a theory or a concept, and I've chosen to discuss simulation theory. I love talking about this. It's super interesting. For me, anyway. So I first learned about simulation theory, 15 or 20 years ago. And it was no more complicated than we could be living in a simulation. That was it. Not a whole lot of meat on the bone to sink your teeth into there. And that means that it's simply as credible as we faked the moon landing, or the earth is flat, or there are reptiles that live underneath Denver International Airport, or any of those kinds of late night dark room discussions. But about 10 years ago, I believe, maybe a little more recently, but not much, I listened to a podcast series, and the podcast series was named The End of the World, and the host was Josh Clark. And during this series, he spent every episode talking about a different existential threat that humanity faces. And certainly, if not the fate of our species being threatened, then definitely our way of life, culture, society, things like that. It's not as dark as it sounds. It's really thought-provoking. And he does a really good job of explaining these risks. And at the end of the series, there's an extra episode. I wouldn't call it a bonus, but I think he might refer to it as one. And this last episode asks the question, but what if none of this is real? Enter simulation theory. In order to thoroughly understand simulation theory and to discuss it in any meaningful way, we need to make a few assumptions. The first assumption is that technology will continue to advance. And the second assumption is that at some point in the future, technology will have advanced to such a level that we cannot distinguish reality from simulation. And then the third assumption, which is equally as important as the first two, is that at some point in the future, after we've reached that threshold where we can't distinguish between simulation and reality, that someone will create a simulation, a simulated world. And those are the three pieces of information, the three assumptions we need to agree to before we can really start talking about simulation theory. I think those three are reasonable. Let's look at the first assumption. There is a concept called Moore's Law, and I believe when you distill it, it has to do with how much processing power can be achieved for each dollar spent. I know it gets misconstrued a lot as an exponential curve of technology capabilities, but I think it has more to do with processing power per investment unit. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But it makes sense. I don't even think necessarily that we need to continue on an exponential curve if we are in fact on one. There just needs to be progress. And to me, that is reasonable because that's just what we as humans do. We seek to improve, and especially technology has become so important to us that we are going to seek to continue to improve the technology. And what gives this a little bit more credibility as an assumption is that it's not dependent on time. This doesn't need to happen in 10 years or 100 years or 10,000 years. It could take us 1,000,000 years if we survive as a species for this assumption to hold true. So check that off the list. The second assumption, of course, is that at some point, we will be able to create simulations that are indistinguishable from reality. I also think there is credence to this assumption. As somebody who's played video games my whole life, starting with the Atari 2600, I've seen these advancements and developments on my own screen. And now with things like VR headsets, even though historically the promises of them have never been truly delivered, we're always getting closer. And it doesn't even have to be a headset. It could be something more akin to the Matrix or a Neuralink. We know that our favorite billionaire is testing Neuralink currently. And so a direct line into your brain and your nervous system could have the same effect as a heavy dose of sedatives and some medical equipment that can trigger something like a dream state. And we all know how convincing dreams can be. So it stands to reason to me that we will reach a point in the future where we can create simulations or realities that are indistinguishable from real reality, assuming that is what we are in right now. So check that one off the list. For me, it passes muster. The third assumption is a slam dunk. That at some point in the future, once we've reached those other two assumptions, that someone will create a simulated reality. This could be somebody doing a school project for their history class, or perhaps they want to understand what their ancestors' lives were like, or someone wants to go back to a certain point in history and witness a historical event from either the outside or as a participant. And it could just be just for fun, a novel generator similar to a video game. And we know that this is going to happen because in this episode of Josh Clark's podcast, he talks about The Sims, the video game, and how the Sims work all on the same procedural rules, the same physics, so to speak, but the inhabitants of that reality and the activities within that reality are completely novel. It's a novelty generator. So we can definitely check that off the list. And I'm going to come back to this example of The Sims in just a minute. So in my mind, we've checked off the three assumptions that we need to meet in order to give credence and talk about simulation theory in some sort of credible fashion. So I think the best place to go here is that when we put all those together, let's say it takes us 1,000 years and technology has continued to improve and Neuralink or some other competitor has managed to create a technology interface directly with the human nervous system to evoke emotions or provide sensory input, or whatever the case may be. Induce a dream state, a dream state where you have control of yourself. Liminal dreaming, I think is what it's called. Anyway, and then somebody does the thing, creates a simulation. If all of those occur, then we have, at best, a 50-50 chance of this being real reality versus a simulated reality, right? Somebody in the far future creates one simulated reality. Then either we are in it or we are not. 50-50 chance. That is it's a pretty big probability. I mean, would you flip a coin? And if somebody told you, if it lands on heads, you're real. If it lands on tails, we're in a simulation. And I mean, really the answer should be, yeah, go ahead, flip the coin. What does it matter? We know that if we are convinced by the reality that we are in, it doesn't really matter whether it's simulated or not, or it's a base reality as referred to in the podcast. But it gets even more convincing than that from a probability perspective, if we just apply a little bit of math. And what Josh Clark does in this podcast episode where he talks about simulation theory is he brings up the point that, you know, in the first year of The Sims being released, they sold some number of millions of copies. Now, imagine that instead of there being one simulation that's created that gives us a 50% chance of being in a simulation, now there are millions of simulations, which gives us an absolutely infinitesimal probability percentage of this being real reality. And when you think about it from that perspective, to me, it seems more plausible than any of the other creation myths. Even especially the scientific understanding of our universe. So, I mean, I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in the supernatural. I think that creation myths and stories have value, but I don't subscribe to them. I don't believe in the tooth fairy either. So, for me, it's especially compelling to understand simulation theory as a thought exercise. I don't think we're living in a simulation. But on the other hand, those assumptions that I listed are reasonable and the math checks out. And I am a proponent of probability and math and what we see around us. So that's simulation theory. It's really interesting. If you're watching and I've screwed any part of it up, or if there's a deeper understanding of the impacts of simulation theory, or there are other nuances that are being argued, or if the theory has evolved, it's more of a thought exercise than a theory. I don't think there's any way to prove or disprove it. As a matter of fact, I think it's going to be impossible to disprove a theory like this, but certainly there's no evidence of it. But to me, it makes more sense. It is more credible and more possible than what a lot of other people understand the universe to be. So that's it for day 10. This has been really awesome. I'm a third of the way through this whole 30-day talk to camera challenge. I think it's going pretty well. As you can see, I got my rain gear on today. It was supposed to start raining and maybe even potentially turn to snow, but that hasn't happened yet. And that's fine. I'm just a little bit warm. I got my pit zips open and I got my jacket unzipped a little bit. So we're just putting all my gear through the paces as I walk my days. That's going to do it. I hope I can see you guys later. Enjoy the rest of for me it's Tuesday. I don't know what it is for you, but enjoy whatever it is. Ciao.